So it only makes sense if you're using sawtooth on the LFO1, and it only makes sense if you use LFO1 as a trigger for the clock of the corresponding sequencer line. So that's not all, because the sequencer, each sequencer line also has parameters, additional parameters. At first, dimension it's just, this determines, it's also on sequencer 1 page, and this knob here determines how many steps are in this sequencer. So if you turn it, for example, like here, then you will have just 5 steps instead of 16. Turned completely to the right, it's 16 steps. First, the first parameter, dimension of each sequencer. The second parameter, running mode. This determines in which direction the sequencer runs if it is clocked. There are also running modes that disable the clocking circuit, and they are named follow. So when speaking of sequencer 1, you can adjust the running mode to follow 2. This means the clocking of sequencer 1 is disabled, and it just is synced to sequencer 2. It just if a step of sequencer 2 is active, the same step of sequencer 1 is active too. It's just a function if you want a sequencer that consists of several lines that always run in sync. You only have to clock one sequencer and adjust the running modes of the other sequences to follow this one. The running mode. Sequencers 1 and 2 also feature quantization mode. That can just be set active or disabled. If it's active, the analog output of the sequencer line is quantized to 16 steps. Why? Because then you can, if you adjust the modulation depth in the right way, you can just have half tones adjusted. It's a bit tricky, but it works. You have to try that out. So this is one sequencer line, and the idea behind this is you can use the 4 sequencer lines in the way you want. You can use sequencer line 1 for melody, sequencer 2 for trigger, for example, or if you don't want to have trigger options and want to trigger just each step, you can also use the LFO as the trigger for the envelopes. Then you can just use for melody sequencers, or just as you want to configure that thing. In most of the factory patches, some connections are established in the sequencer. So for simple things, you may not have to go in the trigger matrix system. If you just want to have some filter modulation, for example, no, I explain which connections are in most of cases established in the factory patches. That is LFO1 connected to sequencer 1 clock and to sequencer 1 start. That means each time LFO1 has its positive phase, the sequencer 1 is clocked. And what also in most of cases is established, that sequencers 2 to 4 follow sequencer 1. so they don't have to be clocked individually. So if you just want some modulation, set up sequencer 1 to whatever and connect via the modulation matrix the analog output of sequencer 1 to the filter, to the pitch, to whatever. Most simple example. The second, another simple example is if you want to trigger the envelopes and you don't want to think about the duration and the gate outputs, you also can use LFO1 to trigger the envelopes. Envelope 1 and envelope 2. This connection has to be established via the trigger matrix. So you go trigger matrix, connect LFO1, envelope 1, then again trigger matrix LFO1 to envelope 2, and then it starts playing.